Hi, my name's Kari Woo, and I'm a fourth generation Chinese Canadian. Currently, I'm acting as a project lead for the Calgary Arts Development. We're doing consultation work with the community in Chinatown to write a public art plan for the neighborhood, and I'm also an independent jewelry designer. My grandfather on my mother's side, he became a merchant, owned a grocery store, and fortunately, my great-grandmother was able to join him here in Canada in 1923, or the papers at least that we have say that she landed in 1923, right before the Exclusion Act came into effect. So basically that meant that our family was able to be together. You know, my great auntie also arrived with my great grandmother, and so then their family was able to continue to be together in Canada. So I had other great aunties that were born here in Canada, and then all of my mom and her sister and brother and all of the cousins in that generation were born here in Canada. Where on my dad's side of the family, great-granddad was not able to bring great-grandmother or his second wife over, and so they were split for the 1923 to 1947, all the years the Exclusion Act was in place, which meant number one, my great-grandfather was alone. Of course, that was a problem for many Chinese bachelors. I mean, my great-granddad did have a family, but he wasn't able to be with them. So his family grew up in China without him, and then, he was here by himself alone in a very small town in southern Alberta. So yes, my maternal great-grandfather, he had his store in Riverside, which is just a little bit west of Bridgeland. At the time, probably it was all dirt roads and such. So he serviced Calgary from, that time forward. And so therefore, when Heritage Park a few years ago was redoing their gasoline alley exhibition kind of permanent display area, they wanted to reflect more historically correct kind of era, replications of the era, I suppose. So they renamed the grocery storefront that they had there after my great-grandfather's grocery store, because he was one of the longest serving stores in Calgary to service Calgary, and help to impact the foodways and development of Calgary's history in terms of food. Yeah. Well, I think the lessons that I would want younger people to learn from that time of history is that it could happen again, and it's really important for community to work together and to be a strong voice to ensure that that doesn't happen again. Of course, during COVID, that we saw anti-Asian racism rise, and so there was concern. And government policy can be, we have to keep a close eye on things in terms of what policies are, right? That we don't want that to happen ever to anybody again. And hopefully it seems like that is happening. But I think we need to be careful and not get lazy or complacent about it, right? And not just for the Chinese community, but for all communities, right? And the other piece I would probably say is that, there was such resilience in that time by the people that were here. I mean, I often think about my great-granddads and what they endured. And I think that as a younger person and for the generations coming up, we can't forget what they went through on our behalf. I have the life I have now in Canada because of all of the hardships that my ancestors and all of the ancestors that were here at that time went through. And that was a hard time. I mean, I wouldn't want anybody to have to go through that. So I think it's important, yeah. For my mom's side of the family who landed here and then were able to all be together because my great-grandmother and great-auntie were on the boat, that one of those last kind of boats that came over in 1923 or before 1923 Exclusion Act, there was a lot of effort to assimilate at that time. And so in terms of even talking to my great aunties or my grandfather when they were alive still, they didn't like to talk about it. They didn't want to drudge up the kind of past, right? And so even in that generation for my family, like my great aunties, they could understand Chinese, but they didn't speak Chinese. And so you can imagine, they were born in Canada in the 1920s, 30s, and so they didn't speak Chinese. They didn't grow up speaking Chinese. They spoke English. And so then subsequently my mom's generation didn't speak, hardly understood Chinese. And then my sisters and I don't speak Chinese. And so, there's a lament for me because we don't have access to that language, and therefore maybe stories or, certain histories, or understanding of history, because, language is a cultural lens on the world, right? But that wasn't in an effort to assimilate, to fit in, to be that kind of model minority. Where my dad's family, because great-grandpa was by himself, but then the family, the rest of the family couldn't come over until after the Exclusion Act was over. Even though my great-granddad was here in the early 20th century, my dad's family is more an immigrant family, and so the Chinese culture was very strong, and the language, still to this day is very strong on that side of the family, and the traditions, like the ancestral traditions, a lot more traditional food, and so it was a very interesting experience growing up because we have these two sides of the family, right? Even though our great-granddads arrived in Canada at around the same time, it was two very different experiences. So my Auntie Mary, Ma, who grew up in Canada, of course, again, came on the boat in 1923, but grew up in Canada. She was one of the people that took the train across Canada in 2006 to receive Stephen Harper's apology for, I think they called it the redress on the head tax. And so that was a really big moment in Chinese Canadian history, that there was a public apology, by the government. And so, we still have a plaque at the house, and my cousin and my mom were very involved in kind of the background of all of that. And a lot of people, of course, were very involved, but in our family, that was a big moment of recognition of our history, and also, we were happy to have that moment spoken, publicly. Yeah. Like I already mentioned, we can't forget what they went through, and I always want to understand the hardships that they went through, and it's important for that, the musical that you were producing is an important piece of that, just to educate people about these things that happened, but also I think, for me personally, I actually, as an interdisciplinary artist, I've made artworks about this time in my personal family, and it's partially been about trying to understand the time and the hardships that they went through, but also to remember or preserve the stories. And so through these artworks now, there's lots of conversation that happen in my family, or when I exhibit them in other places that, with the broader community, like in an art gallery or something, where these stories can be shared. And so I think that's a big piece of it, is sharing the stories. Yeah, if I were able to say anything to my ancestors, it would be thank you. I mean, I think I've probably said it out loud before. I do really realize that they did so much, they sacrificed so much. And I mean, they came from a hard place, I think, in circumstance. That's why they came to Canada. But, what they went through here was, I can't really imagine it. I try to, and it breaks my heart, but it also makes me very proud. And so, for them, I want to work hard and make them proud, and take, maybe not advantage, but just, absolutely understand that the freedom I have now to make the choices I do are because of the work that they did. And so I want to do the best I can for my life, for my career, for my child, and for my community, because of the legacy that I stand on, because of them. Yeah.